Hi, my name is Rabbi Max Reynolds, and I'm here with,
I'm Josh Lasse.
we're here to talk with you today about total pain and the interdisciplinary team.
Just want to start by noting that we have just one disclosure. We do have a video here that we have permission to share. Other than that, no other disclosures.
Our goals for today are to define and recognize total pain, to examine total pain screening, assessment, and the interventions that palliative care IDT clinicians might use to address total pain, and to identify possibilities for approaching total pain.
So let's start just by talking about pain. Definition of pain is an unpleasant sensory or emotional experience associated with or resembling that of actual or potential tissue damage. Be mindful that pain is highly personal and a subjective experience. It's influenced by many factors, including biological, psychological, and social issues that have patients and our people that we see have learned throughout their life. And though pain is fundamentally adaptive role, it can let us know we're in danger. When we experience chronic and serious pain over time, it can have adverse effects on a person's function, social, psychological experiences, existential crisis, and really affect their spiritual well-being. And so that's kind of our definition of pain. So now we're going to talk about this phrase total pain. We're going to look at this as a way of understanding a patient's experience of pain and how it impacts their life while dealing with a serious illness. We'll start with talk about someone you may know, Dame Cicely Saunders. She's kind of known as the founder of modern day hospice and what we know of hospice today. She was actually a trained nurse, social worker, and physician and researcher. She interesting, like her spirituality evolved over her life. She kind of was identified as an atheist as a young adult, and kind of as she's kind of grew, she became more spiritual and converted to Christianity. And her Christian faith and the idea that all individuals on a path to spiritual development is kind of where she founded the hospice and how that was developed. She wrote, we are ourselves a community of the unlike, coming from different faiths and denominations, or the absence of any commitment of this kind. What we have in common is concern for each individual, and our hope is that each person will think as deeply as they can in their own way. So drawing from her kind of multidisciplinary training, she developed and coined the phrase total pain, which really describes the intertwining of someone's physical, social, emotional, and psychological aspects of a person's pain. And the mode she developed to treat this relies heavily on our interdisciplinary team, including physicians, nurses, chaplains, social workers, using different modalities to treat someone's pain and kind of get at their suffering. And as we kind of mentioned, especially us that work in palliative care, our large interdisciplinary team is kind of the core and foundation of how we provide care to our patients. Knowing that there's a complex of psychosocial concerns in patients that really need not just a physician, a nurse, need many members of our team who have expertise in different areas. Palliative care teams kind of members can bring an appreciation for the collaborative work that each of our different colleagues can bring. And then again, as we focus on this, team approach is always helps medical providers increase their sensitivity, awareness, and needs of our population that we see.
So David Kassem is a psychiatrist and an oncologist who's researched extensively on pain, suffering, and existential distress. He writes, suffering in an existential framework develops from the threat to life or injury to the self, with resultant distress, grief at loss, emerging helplessness, and the likelihood that this situation will endure. Poignantly, pain can become overwhelming when its source is uncertain, its meaning dire, and its treatment difficult, and control is perceived as unlikely. I want to highlight a couple things here. Existential distress may manifest after an experience of injury, illness, or threat to life, when there's significant distress, grief, and helplessness, and a likelihood that the situation will not change. The pain a patient feels that involves existential distress can be overwhelming. It can feel like there's no clear source. And the pain can be experienced as dire, and it can feel to patients and their care teams that there's no way to adequately treat it. This pain is impacted by multiple sources, including physical, existential and spiritual, psychosocial, and social domains. And it can feel to patients that there's no way to bring an end to the suffering that they experience. So the question becomes, how do we work together in our interdisciplinary teams to treat existential distress and total pain? We work with existential and spiritual distress relationally through the connections we build with patients and their people. These relationships are special. Sometimes people tell us things that they won't voice aloud to others. And when we're working with people with serious illness, the stakes are high, and our patients and their families and friends are vulnerable. The possibility that they might break into a million pieces is very real, as is the possibility that any number of these pieces might fall through the cracks in our medical systems. Pieces that we might not notice, but might be essential to our patients and their people. Dr. Balducci in Tampa's study on suffering and spirituality analyzed individuals' experiences with illnesses. He identifies these 5 important approaches to patient-centered care that enable us to take seriously the bonds we make with our patients and to lift these up as significant and special. In order to establish a patient-centered care relationship, we must acknowledge the privilege it is to care for the person, acknowledge that we plan to take care of them, not their disease, understand what their goals and wishes are and focus on these and not our own. We must be truthful and compassionate, which we know is not always easy. And we must acknowledge those that are helping to care for our patients in their day-to-day life as essential to their experience and their care. So when we talk about the existential and spiritual components of total pain, what are we talking about? We're talking about these 3 domains, which can be both separate and interrelated, through which we explore and make meaning in our lives. The existential domain is concerned with how an individual understands their self in the world and confronts the reality of their limitations and challenges. As a concept, it is at heart thinking about existence, what it means personally to be alive and to contend with the realities and joys and pains of life. The religious domain is concerned with how we identify and honor whatever it is we identify as significant, which is framed by metaphysical worldviews, theologies, and philosophies that articulate belief and practice based on religious, spiritual, and cultural traditions. It's always both individual and communal. And the spiritual domain is concerned with an individual search for meaning beyond a person's own self through connection with the sacred, higher powers, mystery, transcendence, immanence, boundlessness, nature, etc. While not everyone is interested in each of these domains, they are important for us to think about as palliative care clinicians because all 3 may be part of how a patient experiences their illness, symptoms, hospitalization, community, and care team. In the hospital setting, spiritual care is the field that attends to these domains most closely. Trained chaplains are our spiritual care clinicians and specialists, and our work is in assessing and working with existential and spiritual distress. At the same time, the whole team is engaged in a patient's care: nurses, physicians, social workers, environmental services staff, the PCAs providing one-to-ones, and more. And everyone provides general, existential, and spiritual support to patients and their people. Each individual names for themselves how they understand religion and spirituality and whether and how these are parts of their lives. For many, these are expressed as cultural practices, not religious practices. And even when people are atheist, secular, or do not identify as religious or spiritual, when people experience chronic or serious illness, there's significant potential for an individual to feel like they're being broken into a million pieces. When there's the possibility of this kind of feeling of breaking and of multidimensional suffering, we want to explore with people how it feels to be them, what's holding them, and if those connections have frayed as their pain and symptoms have increased. It's important always to remember everyone names these domains in their own ways and their approaches in their own ways, words, traditions, and contexts. One framework for understanding and identifying the types of existential and spiritual distress that arise for our patients living with serious illnesses comes again from David Kissane, who identifies these 8 forms of existential challenge. They are death anxiety, loss and change, freedom with choice, dignity of the self, fundamental aloneness, altered quality of relationships, meaning, and mystery. The palliative care interdisciplinary team works together to identify, assess, provide support for patients in these domains in order to support patients in mitigating their pain as well as in making sense out of the changing fabric of their lives and supporting them through transition in their illnesses and in their lives. When we approach another person's core existential or spiritual pain, it's important to remember that we don't have the capacity or power to fix another person's distress. We learned from Parker Palmer, if we want to support each other's inner lives, we must remember a simple truth. The human soul does not want to be fixed. It simply wants to be seen and heard. If we want to see and hear a person's soul, there's another truth we must remember. The soul is like a wild animal, tough, resilient, and yet shy. When we go crashing through the woods shouting for it to come out so we can help it, the soul will stay in hiding. But if we are willing to sit quietly and wait for a while, the soul may show itself. We need ground rules for dialogue that allow us to be present to another person's problems in a quiet, receptive way that encourages the soul to come forth. A way that doesn't presume to know what is right for the other, but allows the other soul to find its own answers at its own level and pace. So one ground rule might be, do not expect to fix the pain. And another might be, allow space for silence. This allows people to grieve and speak in their own terms and to move at their own pace, and demands that we slow down and focus everything we do on what our people are sharing with us about who they are, what they're struggling with, and what they're feeling and needing. We can accompany our patients and their people in their distress, and we can create opportunities to allow them to give expression to their pain, but we cannot fix it. And this is a big shift from how we approach healing in medical contexts. We're not seeking a cure for or healing from existential or spiritual distress. We're seeking expression of the pain, opportunities for catharsis, and the development of connection and affirmation of life in its current conditions, however tenuous that affirmation or those conditions might be. And still, even when we're not able to fix the totality of pain our patients might be experiencing, we are often able to palliate it, to offer support and ways to move through and pathways to shaping what Kissane calls an adaptive response to each of these areas of challenge that may support people in fostering equanimity, peace, fulfillment, engagement with life, creativity, and joy, even through their existential and spiritual challenges and pains. These are some of the ways we work together as an interdisciplinary team to address the physical, existential, and spiritual, social, and psychosocial elements that contribute to total pain in each of Kissane's identified areas of existential challenge. Screening helps clinicians from all disciplines identify when a patient might benefit from a referral to spiritual care for more specialized assessment and follow-up. Spiritual care works with all patients to address existential and spiritual distress, and chaplains are equipped to support secular and atheist-identified people, spiritual but not religious people, and people from all religious and cultural practices and traditions. This is an example of a method of screening we use internally. When screening for referral to spiritual care to address total pain, what clinicians from all disciplines can look for is a recent stressor that impacts how a person experiences the world, causes distressing emotions, has potential to impact symptoms and health outcomes, and is more severe if we think about it on a pain scale. And the chaplain can do a more in-depth assessment of potential sources of existential and spiritual distress and provide interventions that will address these sources of pain and suffering. Sharing your screening with the chaplain can help them to frame their introduction to their patient and initiate their assessment.
Okay. Now that we've kind of talked about what pain is, the total pain experience that a lot of our patients see, and went through how each of them plays a role in a patient's experience, why don't we talk about a patient that we took care of? So we'll go over Mr. D. He is a patient that we saw on as a palliative care consult. He's a 46-year-old cisgender male. He had a past medical history of chronic kidney disease, some CAD and heart failure, and was admitted for an elective fistula placement because he was now on dialysis. Ended up being complicated with some cardiac issues and was in the cardiac ICU for a while. He had a long hospital course. That was one of the big complications was calciphylaxis, which is very severe, had large wounds, and that created a lot of physical pain for him. So we were originally consulted for pain, saw him and his family for a while, which kind of led into more goals of care discussions. Originally started him on some opioids and kind of tried to help treat his pain. So as his hospital progressed and as his illness got more severe, we did have a family meeting with patient and his loved ones where they did opt for a more comfort-focused care for the patient. He was at that time getting dialysis through this admission, but it was decided that we will not continue dialysis. We kind of, as many of you know, patients with renal failure, it is a challenge to manage pain with opioids, given how so much of it is filtered through the kidneys. So we kind of got him on a better pain regimen, and we're lucky we have a palliative care unit here. So we transitioned him to our palliative care unit, kind of to be more aggressive with his symptom management and try to help relieve that. So being in palliative care, we always focus on not just the patient, but the family as a unit. So some of his kind of family that we knew, so he kind of identified as a single mom and dad. He had two kids. At that time, they were aged 15 and 18. The kid's mom had not been in their life since they were young. So he kind of grew up as a single dad. Both kids, what we learned from him and family, that they were very distressed. They were having trouble in school, poor attendance. The patient had a sister that was their main support and kind of taking care of the kids while he was in the hospital. And there were a lot of financial concerns. The patient had been going through dialysis. He had stopped working for a while and a very long hospitalization. So there were concerns there about not only this current situation, but in the future and kind of how to handle, how to best support the children.
This is our working framework for our care with Mr. D and his family. Illness is a threat to a human being's sense of wholeness, affecting biologic, psychological, interpersonal, and spiritual elements. It's also important to highlight here that the reciprocal suffering in this case was profound. Mr. D's illness is not only a medical event, but it impacted his core sense of being, his sense of stability in the world, and the ways he could and wanted to parent his children. In the next few slides, we're going to highlight the breakdown of the total pain elements we identified earlier that contribute to total pain.
Okay, so let's start with just a total pain assessment and see how all of the factors play into his pain. So we're pretty good at recognizing and addressing physical pain. So in his case, it was actually very clear to see with the large wounds on his body with calciphylaxis, the physical pain was very high. He reported 10 out of 10 pain. Some of our team members were very impressed and thought this was one of the worst cases they had seen of calciphylaxis. And it was really, again, a fine line of treating his physical pain, but then also needing to treat some of the other elements of his total pain experience. Treating his pain, physical pain, played out in two ways. treating the wounds. So as you know, calciphylaxis has many wounds on the body. So we had to do a lot of physical hands-on care of turning, dressing changes. He was a pretty big guy, so there was a large, lots of wounds throughout his body, and so it did take a lot of time. And the second was, as you know, with opioids and things that we do to treat physical pain, it does have that effect of drowsiness and some of the side effects that we have with that. And one of his main goals was to be there with his children and family and interact with them. And so we did have this conundrum of trying to treat his physical pain, but worried about the side effects that came with this, while he still wanted to have meaningful interactions with his family. And he was willing to withstand some of the deeper physical pain, and that way he could work on some of these existential, social, and psychosocial needs that also impacted his pain experience. So now that this leads us to explore, we talked about physical, some of the other elements that Mr. D's total pain experience involved. So when we look at kind of the spiritual and existential suffering, his identity was a father. He loved his children. That was a big part of his life. And what's interesting, when you look at the Latin root of spirituality, it actually comes from the word spiritus, meaning breath or wind. And we like to translate this as kind of in asking the question, what gives breath to your life? What helps keep you alive? And for Mr. D, his children were that breath for him. You know, during his hospitalization, he was followed by many different spiritual care providers. We had, when he ended up on our palliative care unit, one of the chaplains had a couple sessions with him. And initially, just meeting him, he expressed a lot of regret and identified feelings of failure as a father. And so what our chaplain did was able to have a joint session with him and his children so he could express what he was feeling and then give them space to openly talk and kind of process what these feelings were coming from. And his children were very open to that and did kind of talk about how he was a perfect father and they loved and supported him and did not feel that he was a failure, and kind of really helped create that sense of healing that we were hoping to help with. Sorry. You know, we mentioned this earlier, but certainly worth emphasizing that while we can parse out each element of the total pain, there's so many overlapping that is very gray. And so it's hard to differentiate. So one of the overlaps we see is this sense of abandonment, which could fall under spiritual, psychological, and social pain. He, again, was a single parent. The kid said he was both their mother and father, which reminds us that this family had an intimate experience with loss and parental loss and abandonment in the past. So be mindful that that experience is playing a role here now. And then, of course, being chronically ill for so long, family had kind of adjusted to multiple hospitalizations that he had, and then being on dialysis, as you know, you're doing that 3 days a week normally. So as his condition had worsened and his illness had progressed, he did stop working, and it left the family in a deep kind of social pain. Financially, they were struggling. When he was working, he was able to provide, and then not working, it was tough on them. It was interesting when you look at it, one of the family members had brought up, they were really concerned about medical bills, how we're going to pay for this. They even talked about maybe donating his body to science as a way to not have to pay so much for funeral services or arrangements. They did ultimately decide against that because it would take a while, and they had spiritual rituals in mind and were hoping to spread his ashes in water kind of soon after his death. And because Mr. D was hospitalized and children were under 18, they needed an adult presence. They moved in with their aunt, the patient's sister that I mentioned, and she took care of them. This was kind of, in fact, a blessing for them, though still painful because of the separation for their dad. Geographically, the aunt lived kind of far away, and it was kind of difficult traveling back and forth to the hospital to have these connections and interactions. And then something else that was kind of unique was Mr. D's eldest son wanted to kind of visit often, whereas the youngest son was more averse to it, didn't really want to come, and was dropping out of school, not going to school, felt very isolated. And so it was very challenging to work with him because he didn't come to the hospital often. So what we did, we were able to work with his aunt and kind of connected her with the guidance counselor with his school and tried to give as much support as we could from afar. And then the oldest son, again, he was here frequently. We had meetings with him, interactions with him, and kind of just helped him process the fact that his dad is dying. And he kind of spoke of his role as now being the man of the house. And then when we talk about kind of the social aspect of a total pain experience, one of the sons, was talking about asking, could he donate a kidney to his dad? Really kind of endorsing deep psychological pain. And then we began to see that reciprocal suffering with how the son's pain was affecting the patient. And so the son's distress was really affecting the patient's pain experience. And so once he realized that his dad was too sick and we were not going to be able to donate a kidney, unfortunately, he kind of shifted his mentality to wanting to donate his, again, dad's body to science. And he was thinking about not only what we talked about, these overlapping gray areas of the financial aspect, but also wanted his research, like thinking that if they donated his body to science, other people may benefit in the future of like better treating calciphylaxis, or just kind of making comments like no one should have to go through this. So as part of the care for Mr. D, we all had an honor. It was an honor to witness the powerful bond that the patient had with his kids. And because of the hospitalization, the patient's pain, and geographic distance, there was a separation that required multiple layers of interventions to connect and reconnect with immediate family members through his hospital stay.
So these are some of the interventions that we used as an interdisciplinary to respond to Mr. D's pain. So at the physical level, we use pain and symptom management. At the existential and spiritual level, we do interventions that help Mr. D as dad remain dad. One of the big things that we did was to bring ritual, especially around his son's graduation, to Mr. D in hospital, because it's such an eventful day and really connects to that helping dad remain dad and being present for the big sort of like milestones in his son's life. And then also to provide opportunities to say goodbye. Psychosocially, interventions include providing developmentally appropriate counseling for the children, attention to issues of guardianship and making sure his kids were well attended to, and these questions that emerged around donating body to science versus burial versus funeral versus memorial, and just thinking about all the different aspects that are included in that, both sort of like the financial considerations, the memorialization considerations, and just sort of his family's need to feel close to his body through and after death. And then socially, interventions really focused around providing emotional support and counseling for the whole family, the patient, his sons, and his sister, that aunt.
And so we did an assessment. We talked about the different interventions that we use, but we were fortunate, some of the outcomes that we saw, we did feel that we were able to better manage his pain and symptoms, helped increase connectiveness of his patient and the family. That he was able to have a lot of meaningful interactions with them. help patient and family reduce their anxiety after some of these interventions that were had, help say goodbye, help express emotions, addressing kind of unfinished business that he talked about. And what we were hoping for, and while it is difficult to identify, but helping focus on all of those aspects of the total pain experience and the total care experience helped with kind of total healing of the patient and family members. And so as we spoke, one of the things, it was pretty amazing, it was one of our chaplains who was in touch with the patient's son's guidance counselor at the school, who ended up being a very meaningful interaction, and you will see in a minute. But one of the things the patient, Mr. D, really wanted to see was his son graduate. He was in his last year of school. They actually worked on letting him take finals early because of the time of year, and we did an official graduation. And so this is a video that we took of, we will share now. It was a very meaningful day we had on our palliative care unit for him, his family, our staff. It was really touching. And as I briefly mentioned, sometime after we took care of him, we got a letter from the guidance counselor who was son's school. And I'm just going to read it just to show kind of the impact that we see in caring for a total pain picture and caring for a patient and trying to hit all these domains, the impact you have not only on the family, but of other people that are in their lives. Greetings to an amazing care team. We appreciate you all beyond any words I can write. We appreciate you for seeing the good in B, seeing his potential, the agape love he carries for his father and family, the need for a loving father who raised his boys alone to witness his first son achieve an important milestone, and most of all, seeing this celebration as something worth your efforts and time. As a public school servicing many students dealing with egregious circumstances, sometimes to protect our own emotional well-being, we become desensitized to the needs of those we've been called to service. During the time of year, we're indicated with delivering bad news to some families regarding who may not graduate, who didn't pass the class, or who failed an exam by 1 point on a third attempt. You reminded us to keep an open heart and continue to explore ways in which we can support our students and families during times they need it most. Thank you for so graciously giving us a platform to honor such an outstanding young man. Thank you for bestowing upon us the honor of learning for B and his family. Your care and support has given us a boost to return to work and love all the Bs of our school a little more than we did today.
So these are recommendations for total care. Assess patients and their family and community as a unit of care. Do proper screening of the whole person, including physical, social, psychosocial, and existential and spiritual domains. Knowing who is on your team and resources available within your work setting and in the community so that you can appropriately get those resources and those people to the patients who need them in ways that align with the supports needed. Sort of with that, understand the team members' roles and also the limitations of those roles. And above all, think outside of the box and be creative. That's how we attend best to the sort of dynamism and mystery of humans. We're invited in our work as part of the interdisciplinary team to accompany our patients and their families and communities through the terrain of illness, hospitalization, and life's transitions. The physician and anthropologist Paul Farmer describes accompaniment in this way. Accompaniment is an elastic term that has a basic everyday meaning. To accompany someone is to go somewhere with them, to break bread together, to be present on a journey with a beginning and an end. There's an element of mystery, of openness, of trust in accompaniment. As a companion says, I'll go with you and support you on your journey wherever it leads. By approaching our work in this way, we create the possibility of partnering with our patients and those close to them and addressing the multiple sources of pain and suffering that might be present in their lives, and give us more opportunities to truly see, hear, and address what is most important for each of them. Thanks so much for learning with us today. Again, I'm Rabbi Max Reynolds. I'm a palliative care chaplain here at Mount Sinai Hospital.
Also, yes, thank you. I'm Josh Lassing. I'm a nurse and clinical coordinator here with the palliative care team at Mount Sinai. We're going to end off with a couple questions that are not very tough, hopefully, if you've been listening over the past little bit. So question number one, what elements comprise total pain? Again, should be pretty straightforward if you've been listening to us. We have physical, social, psychosocial, existential, spiritual, and of course, they are all of the above.
And question two, the interdisciplinary team and team approach, A, is the foundation of palliative care. B, has been shown to increase medical provider sensitivity. C, supports caring for the complex psychosocial concerns present in the palliative care patient population. And of course, D, all of the above.
Good luck, and thank you for joining.